Hey, what's up, it's JakeCenZ. I was wondering, what is the best classic Sonic boss? Not including Mania, just the originals. So I figured I'd play through each classic Sonic game and rank the main bosses from each one. Just a little side note, I won't be going over the mini bosses from Sonic 3 and Knuckles because that would be a lot to cover, so I'm just going to stick to the end of zone bosses from each game. Now here's the tier list I'll be using. I'm going to be ranking each boss based on their difficulty and fun factor. So let's get into Sonic 1. The first Sonic the Hedgehog boss is a pretty iconic one and a great start to this tier list. It's a pretty average boss fight, and I'll put it at B so it can serve as a baseline for every other boss to come. Next is the Marble Zone boss, which seems difficult at first, but is actually pretty easy to hit, so I'll put this one at B since it isn't really worse or better than the Egg Wrecker. Seeing a pattern here with the next boss for Spring Yard, Eggman really likes his Eggmobile with weapons on it. Again, this one gets a B since it's pretty much the same as the last two, not much else to say. Finally something different, but it's Labyrinth Zone. It's really hard to call this a boss fight when all you do is chase Eggman down, and the water in this section can be really annoying, so this one's going in D. Starlight Zone, my favorite zone from Sonic 1, and although that may be the case, this boss fight isn't anything to write home about. The mechanic is a bit repetitive, and not much happens in the fight, so it's a C for me. A real challenge, the final boss of Sonic 1. This is getting an A since the fight incorporates some light mechanics and isn't easily defeated. The final boss from Sonic 1 is the best in the game, but I don't think it's the best to come just yet. Sonic CD is probably my least favorite classic Sonic game, but that doesn't mean I don't enjoy it. The boss fights in this game are extremely hit or miss, ranging from S to D tier. First up is Palm Tree Panic, and this boss is really easy. It's out in 3 hits and takes just as many seconds to destroy, so it's going to D. Oh no, not this boss. You either get this boss or you don't. The Collision Chaos Pinball boss. I am hesitant to put this in D because it isn't a hard boss at all, but it can sometimes take minutes trying to get the pinball mechanics to work for you. I'll put it in C since I don't really think it's as bad as the Palm Tree Panic boss. Tidal Tempest. Great aesthetic, and a decent boss as well. Pretty easy, but I think the lead up to the fight is great, and a B is what I'll give this one. The Quartz Quadrant boss is an A, and that's all because of its uniqueness. Running down Eggman's control room on a treadmill is great, and avoiding the bombs he drops on you as well means you can't just hold forward the entire time. Somehow this boss manages to not be as bad as the zone it's in, Wacky Workbench. In terms of boss mechanics, and it's fun, it has those, and while difficulty may be lacking after your first playthrough, I think it still deserves a B. And here's what I've been leading up to, Stardust Speedway, the Metal Sonic boss fight. I don't think I need to explain how cool it is having a race against Metal Sonic be the boss fight for the zone. This one gets an S on cool factor alone, easily the best boss in Sonic CD. Following up the first S tier on the list is the final boss from Sonic CD, which doesn't feel very final in its difficulty compared to the final boss from Sonic 1. This is super easy and pretty basic. The best I can give it is a B for visuals, but really you should just play Stardust Speedway. On to Sonic 2. This is the classic Sonic game I have the most experience with, and I've fought these bosses many times. We begin things strongly with the Egg Driller from Emerald Hill Zone, and this boss gets an easy A. It's the first boss of Sonic 2, and while it may not be challenging, it's fun to see how fast you can take it down. Chemical Plant. This is a really easy fight if you time it right. Just look at how fast I finish this boss. Disregarding that, it's a challenging enough fight, and it's got some fun if you manage not to fall in the water, so I'll give it a B. Hold on a sec, I just gotta widen up the B tier real quick. And there we go. Now for a really fun boss. Aquatic Ruin is an okay zone, but the boss is the best part. It's simple yet fun, and jumping back and forth between the pillars using the arrows Eggman fires is very neat. I'll give this boss an S since it's both a fun and creative fight. The Casino Night boss at this point feels pretty basic, and the pinball mechanic isn't very fun to utilize, so running along the walls becomes the best strategy to use. This boss gets a C because while it can be destroyed incredibly quickly like the Chemical Plant boss, if you don't, then the given mechanics aren't very fun. And the award for the quickest boss fight goes to the Hilltop Zone boss, somehow managing to blow up faster than the mech from Palm Tree Panic. Seriously, this boss is barely on screen at all. This one is going to D, and I can't see it being any higher. The Egg Driller makes its return, or does it? The Mystic Cave boss is the second drilling boss from Sonic 2, and this time, it's not as good. You can destroy this boss as soon as it drops down and is exposed, so it'll go into C. On to the Oil Ocean boss. This one can fall into the same category as the Hilltop Zone boss, but if it isn't immediately destroyed, there's a bit of challenge involved. Sonic 2's bosses sort of fall off in the middle, and I don't think this one is any different, so it's going into C. Finally, a better boss. The Metropolis Zone boss is similar to the Tidal Tempest one, but more difficult. Rather than using bubbles, Eggman has learned from his previous mistakes, and surrounded himself with many Eggmobiles? I guess they work at adding some challenge, so I'll give it a B. I debated whether or not to consider this a boss, but I'll include it anyway. The Wing Fortress boss is just a giant laser and that's about it. It's a B in terms of boss fights, but it'll get outdone later on. Finally, the last two boss fights of Sonic 2. I'll include these together since they're both from Death Egg Zone, the Sonic 2 version. First up is Silver Sonic, or Mega Sonic, whatever you prefer. And this one is tough for a lot of people. I like having the challenge of not having any rings, so personally, I really enjoy this fight. But once you do manage to take down Silver Sonic, you move on to the Death Egg Robot, one of the most iconic bosses in Sonic history. The boss fight truly earns it. Having to take this down on top of Silver Sonic without getting hit really hammers home the final boss aspect of these fights. With these bosses combined, it easily gets an S tier. Rounding out this quadrilogy of games is Sonic 3 and Knuckles. This is where boss fights really pick up in the classic Sonic games, and a lot of these are very creative. Just a reminder, I'm only going over the end of zone bosses, so the Act 1 mini bosses won't be featured in this tier list. First up is the Egg Scorcher in Angel Island Zone. This boss can be easy depending on if you grab the Flame Shield just before fighting the boss. If not, it's a bit of a challenge, but really not that hard. I'll put it in B tier. Next up is Hydra City, and yes, I say Hydra City, not Hydrocity. This boss isn't super memorable. If anything, the Act 1 mini boss is more memorable, but I still think it deserves a B since it's not a bad boss fight or anything. Now with a really unique boss is Marble Garden Zone. This one has Tails fly Sonic towards Eggman in order to damage him, which is a really neat idea. The boss fight can be over quick if you damage it enough before it destroys the ground, but I still think it's an A tier boss. Oh boy, Carnival Night Zone. This boss is a weird one, and one of the less unique bosses in all of Sonic 3. I think overall, it gets a C, since it isn't all that fun, and you can take it down quickly. Ice Cap Time. And unfortunately for one of the best zones in Sonic 3, the boss fight doesn't live up to the hype. Eggman's mech freezes Sonic, which can be annoying, but overall the fight isn't very hard, and there's not much to do. It can go in the C tier. Now for my personal favorite zone in Sonic 3, Launch Base. And wouldn't you know it, the boss fights here are really good. You begin with the Egg Bomber, which isn't that hard, then you move on to this Tower Eggmobile. But once those are taken down, you get to the ultimate fight, the Big Arms boss. As long as you're playing either Sonic Origins or Sonic 3, separate from Sonic and Knuckles, that is. The Big Arms boss rivals the Death Egg Robot for the best final boss, but regardless, both are S tier. Once the Big Arms boss is taken down, you move into Sonic and Knuckles. The first zone, Mushroom Hill Zone, is a decent boss, in which you chase Eggman's mech. This is a pretty simple boss, but seeing as it is the first zone of Sonic and Knuckles, it still works, and it can get a B tier. Flying Battery Zone takes the laser idea from Wing Fortress Zone and improves on it by having it only be the first half of the boss fight. The second phase sees Eggman hanging onto the flying battery and occasionally swinging up to be damaged. This boss fight is an A tier for having a two-phased fight and improving upon the Wing Fortress Zone laser boss. Now hear me out here. Sandopolis Zone isn't all too bad. Well, except the boss fight kinda is. In terms of visuals, the giant mech Eggman uses is pretty cool, but the fight itself is pretty boring. All you do in this fight is attack the mech, not super original. I'll give it a C tier since it isn't the worst boss ever, just not very creative. Moving on to Lava Reef Zone, you better have some mods to make this boss go by quicker, or else you'll be here for a bit. For some reason, you have to damage this boss 14 times, which can go on for a while, and the worst part is that you can't directly damage it at all. The boss is pretty difficult if you don't grab the flame shield before the fight, and that combined with the ridiculous health is why it's going into the D tier. Now for the fight with Knuckles. This boss isn't Eggman for once, and while it may not be the craziest in terms of mechanics, it's a great story moment, so I'll give it an A tier. Sky Sanctuary features a multi-phased boss fight with Mecha Sonic. This fight features some of Eggman's old boss mobiles, but at the end, you face off against Mecha Sonic by itself. This fight is really cool, and it shows how far Sonic has come as he fights multiple old Eggmobiles in a row and can still defeat Mega Sonic. This is an A-tier fight in terms of fun and creativity, and it's got some challenge too. The penultimate boss of Sonic 3 and Knuckles is in the Death Egg Zone, the Sonic 3 version. This boss is also a multi-phased fight and can actually be pretty tough if you aren't an experienced player. The first phase utilizes the gravity mechanic present in the zone and makes for an interesting boss, but the Death Egg Robot 2 fight is what really sells this one, destroying its fingers, and then as it tries to blast Sonic into space with the Master Emerald, all makes this an A-tier fight. So, you've collected all the Chaos Emerald once, maybe even twice, and finally, the game really rewards you for doing so, as you are thrown into the final boss of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, the Doomsday Zone. Easily the most epic feeling boss in the classic Sonic games, as Super or even Hyper Sonic races through space to destroy Eggman's Death Egg Robot and take back the Master Emerald. This fight can be challenging if you don't take enough rings or go too slow, but the fun is certainly there. This boss is an easy S tier in terms of spectacle alone, but the rest of the fight is also a blast to play, and a true reward for collecting all the Chaos Emeralds. Well, that's every boss fight from the classic Sonic games. There's a lot of them, although I feel like I might be missing one. There we go. Now that's all of them. The B tier really filled out in this list, and I'm surprised there weren't many D tier bosses. In terms of which one is the best, however, well, I think I have to give it to either of the final bosses of Sonic 3 Knuckles. I really can't decide. Both the Big Arms boss and Doomsday Zone are awesome fights, and are deserving of the title Best Classic Sonic Boss. Well, thanks for watching me ramble about some bosses and games I enjoy. This is actually my first YouTube video ever, so if you're seeing this video, leave a comment if you enjoyed it at all, or have anything you'd want to see me improve on. I've been a part of the Sonic community for a while, but I thought making some YouTube videos seemed like a cool idea, so I figured I'd give it a shot. Anyways, leave a like if you'd want to see more from me, and maybe even subscribe to help show your support. It'd really let me know if I should continue making these, and maybe I'll see you next time.